Hi guys, this is your week 2 video. In this video I'm just going to walk through the readings for this week and then also the assignments that I want you to complete. This video is going to talk about the paragraph responses that you'll do. You haven't done one of these yet. They're very similar to the discussion board paragraphs, but they require a very formal structure. So I'm going to talk about that. You'll have a discussion board as well. First I'll talk about the readings, then I'll talk about the lessons that I want you to study and why, and then I'll go into the details of the assignments. So watch this video, or if you want to skip over some stuff that's not important, that's cool. But definitely watch like the last half of the video. Okay, so what are we reading this week and why? The 6 readings that we are looking at this week really are for us to kind of contain all of these like women voices from this time period. So from 1865 to 1914, if you remember in week 1, we read like the chapter content and it talked about the woman question, so like how are women's lives changing at the turn of the century? How are women's lives changing post-Civil War? How are women's lives changing with industrialization? All sorts of things like this. And we're going to read 5 female voices, and then we're also going to read a text that, you pick 3, so maybe you won't read this one, but if you want to read it, we're going to read a text that's written from the male perspective about women, about a woman, a young girl who, she's probably like 19, who is just kind of like starting out in life, and her ideals and her path. That text is from an entire novel, so we're only going to read 2 chapters, but it's going to give us sort of a visual of like realism, that stuff that you read about last week. Okay, so we are reading 269 by Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson didn't title any of her poems, so somebody just cataloged them all and gave them titles. There's no reason that they're just all numbered. A lot of people refer to it as Wild Nights. That's sort of the subject of the poem. So it's not even a page long. It's just like, I think 12 lines or something like that. It's a passionate poem about desire and romance, or however you want to interpret it. Poetry is kind of subjective. So the poem is, I think it's very passionate. You can read it and find out. Our textbook says her many love poems seem to have emerged in part from close relationships with at least one woman and several men. So you can maybe decide if you're going to read this poem, like, is she talking about a woman or is she talking about a man? Is it possible to tell? And if so, how? The more that you start to interpret literature, and for those of you who choose to take on like a psychoanalytical approach to understanding literature, particularly from the Freudian realm, you'll probably realize that a lot of how you can interpret literature means that your mind remains almost permanently like in the gutter. So if you interpret this text from that perspective, you'll get a very different message than if you just interpret it from a more wholesome perspective, maybe. So hopefully I'm intriguing some of you. Okay, so along this line is The Storm by Kate Chopin. I love this text. I love Kate Chopin. She's so great. Her regionalist writing, which often takes place in Louisiana, like I think she lived in St. Louis and also in New Orleans, so sort of like those areas, but like the French Quarter of New Orleans. I think that's sort of the visual that I want you to get whenever you read this text. It's 4 pages. It's super short. It's totally worth it. I encourage all of you to pick this one. It's about passion. It's about adultery. It's about a storm that just rolls through probably Louisiana, and a former lover stops by, and what happens? I don't know. Read it and find out. I do know. Things happen. Read it and find out. So our textbook says, the influence of French fiction on her work showed in stories that were much more erotic and guilt-free than the American norm. And, obviously we're talking about a time period that by no means was as expressive as things like that we read and watch today. So, like today, nudity, no big deal. Bad words, no big deal. All of those things are incorporated in our movies and our TV shows and stuff like that. And of course, like in the turn of the century, in like the early 1900s, the late 1800s, that stuff was very taboo. So Chopin is sort of writing in this possibly taboo way. So I really encourage you guys to read this story. It's great. A New England Nun by Mary E. Wilkins Freeman. This is about 8 pages, so it's, again, really short, but a little bit longer than the last 2. And this text is possibly might be characterized as mundane, but it's very interesting because it's going to flip feminism a little bit. A lot of women are like, I'm sick of doing my duty as a woman. I don't want to do my duty as a woman. Or, whatever, whoever says that women have to do these things. But anyway, in the time period, like women should cook and clean and take care of their husbands and have babies and all sorts of things like that. And so this sort of spins that around. Feminism might argue, well, those things are limiting. Those things are not allowing women to reach their full potential intellectually, things like that. But in this text, A New England Nun, the main character actually enjoys doing those things. She wants to do those things, and those like mundane household tasks are for her and not for her husband. And her husband is gone. He's been away for like 14 years. And so she's gotten into this routine of doing things the way that she wants. Like she is in control in this text. And then her husband comes home and just kind of like throws a wrench into everything. And it frazzles her very much so. So it's interesting. Definitely take a look at it. And there's some really great questions that you guys can ask about A New England Nun. The textbook says the story illustrates Freeman's deep interest in the social restrictions placed on women and the resulting rebelliousness. So something to think about. The Yellow Wallpaper, maybe some of you have read this before because this is a very, very, very popular text. I think that it's even something that people will read in high school. Maybe I didn't do anything in high school. So read The Yellow Wallpaper. It's like a journal, a bunch of journal entries by the main character, the narrator. And it sort of explores like the woman has been diagnosed with depression and with hysteria, and so the cure for her is to just basically be bedridden. She's just had a baby. She's probably in modern times going through like postpartum depression. But the doctor said, well, you just need to lay in bed and not do anything. Don't do a thing. Don't have a thought. Don't write anything down. Don't don't move around too much. Just be in bed. Someone could prescribe that to me. I'd be really happy about that. But in the time period, not so great. And if you have things you want to be doing, it's also not a great diagnosis. Okay, so it kind of goes through her process of being in bed and how that actually makes her condition worse. If you want to think about this text as a psychological thriller and a story of madness, you certainly can, but it's a very calm version of those. The textbook says the Yellow Wallpaper remains Gilman's most widely read and discussed literary work. So it's talked about all the time. If you want to use this class to understand really popular American lit, this is definitely a text that you want to read. Okay, 2 more. So we also have Roman Fever by Edith Wharton. And Edith Wharton is a really popular novelist in the time period, and she writes a lot of like female-centered female-driven text, female-centered text. Roman Fever is about 9 pages, so if you're looking for the shorter texts, this might be one of them. And so my little blurb here is if you've ever wanted to see inside the mind of a woman, you should read this story, because there's going to be some internal monologue from the characters, and it's like these 2 women are having lunch with each other. They may be having tea and even dinner because they're together for quite a while, and they're sitting on this balcony, and their daughters have gone off with these men, and they're just sort of like reminiscing on their lives and how they know each other and the shared connection that they have. And one woman's internal monologue is like how women do, sort of like assessing the other woman and all of the things that the other woman that she knows about the other woman. So there's like, you could possibly read into this and say she's kind of judgy, but it's really so much into the mind of a woman. But there's a plot twist at the end, kind of, maybe not a plot twist, but as our textbook says, a long buried secret that kind of comes to light at the end of the text, which I think if you ever have this need or this desire for revenge, might not be the right word here, but just to like get back at someone, or like, I'll show you, this text will fulfill that need and that desire. So if you're feeling like feisty, read this text. From our textbook, Roman fever concerns a lifelong rivalry between two leisure class women, a long buried secret of illicit love, and the tensions between the old world and the new. So I would encourage you to read this. And then we have Sister Carrie, chapters 1 and 3. Why does the book not give us chapter 2? Probably because it's irrelevant, boring, maybe, I don't know. So this is the text that's not written. This is the one text for this week not written by a woman. It's 14 pages, so it's a little bit longer. And this is, for me, like literary realism at its most realist, I guess. It's so real. It is just so real. These chapters talk about a girl she's going to visit her sister in Chicago. She goes on a train. She meets this guy, and they're kind of he's obviously hitting on her. They're chatting it up a little bit, and then she like says goodbye to him, but she gets his contact info. She's gonna write him because he's so cute or whatever. Then she goes to her sister's place. In chapter 2, which we don't read, in chapter 2, her sister is like, hey, if you're gonna stay here, you probably need to find something to do, so you need to get a job. Okay, sister, like I just got here and you're telling me to get a job. Anyway, whatever. She gets a job. She goes to find a job. That's chapter 3. Chapter 3 is she's looking for a job. So it's really going to reflect sort of the realism of kind of like what an independent woman is supposed to do, and a lot of like this urban city center. So you're going to see a really heavy description of the Chicago city. So if that interests you, definitely read it. Our textbook, Sister Carrie, remains powerful because it addresses so many issues that remain pressing in our contemporary moment: class mobility, immigration, urban life, the challenge facing women who seek independence and control of their sexuality, the pressure to succeed in American society, and celebrity culture. So if those things are interesting to you, then I would definitely encourage you to read Theodore Dreiser, I don't know how to say that, Sister Carrie, chapter 1 and 3. So not chapter 2. Chapter 2 is just kind of like she goes to the apartment. They say, hey, get a job. Okay. So what else you have to do this week? In addition to reading 3, pick 3 of these readings. You do not have to read them all unless you want to get the most out of the class. Lessons to study. There's some vocab stuff that I want you to go over. In-text citations for poetry. So if you plan to write about a poem at all this semester, please learn about citing for poetry. It's slightly different than citing for prose or drama. Annotating and performing a close read. How to write a close read paragraph. If you're going to skip any of the lessons, please do not skip these ones, because how to write a close read paragraph is going to show you and talk about the structure that I absolutely need you to use when you're writing your paragraph response for this unit or for this week. You are going to have to structure, topic sentence, context, quote, analysis, concluding sentence, with potentially some repetition in between. It really just depends on like what you're going to write about. So the structure is there, the notes are there. If you don't know what a close read is, please make sure that you are walking through that lesson. They're very detailed, but I tried to make them short. I also want you to know how to format your work in MLA. So if you have not mastered MLA format, please go through that lesson. And there's also a lesson in there on titles. In terms of MLA, one thing that I want to talk about that I'm really picky about is the date. The date should be formatted day, month, year. So like today, 27 May 2018. So you've got to format it like that. I'm really picky. I'll take off points. All right. So what are you doing? Like, what are you going to turn in this week? You're going to have a close reading response paragraph. This is your first response paragraph. And again, it's sort of the same concept in terms of the discussion board, where I want you to dig into the details of something to kind of look at a narrow aspect of the text and write about it in a paragraph. But I'm asking that you please structure your paragraph in a very formal way, in a very prescribed way, because once you learn this structure, you can begin to meld it and tweak it, and then you can really be successful in your final essay. So when you're analyzing for your final essay, this structure, you're going to have to write 6 of these paragraphs. So you're going to have a lot of practice of how do I write a paragraph for this type of literary analysis. Okay. So close reading response paragraph, your task for each of your close reading responses is to ask and answer in a paragraph, not more than a paragraph, not less than a paragraph. Ask and answer a question about one of the texts we've read this week. This is similar to your discussion board assignments, but requires a formal and specific structure. What is a close read? Digging into the details of the text, you pick apart one section of the reading in order to make a broader claim or argument. Sometimes it's a small, broader claim or argument. Sometimes it's a big, broader claim or argument. It really just depends on what it is that you want to talk about. Format. Write your document in MLA. Title your response something that reflects the content, something more than just like response 1, something like that. Before you begin your paragraph, please write the question that you're responding to. Structure, start with a topic sentence. And again, go through there's examples, but then also in the lesson where I say how to write a close read paragraph, I'm going to walk you through the specifics of the structure, what to do, what to avoid, and I'm going to show you an example. So start with a topic sentence, provide some context, give me the quotes. What are you looking at? So some of you have been looking at your discussion board, some of you aren't quoting. That's okay, the discussion boards are informal. But for the response paragraphs, they're very formal, they're very formulaic, and they're very specific. So I need you to be quoting things. It's really hard to analyze effectively and communicate that analysis effectively to your reader if you aren't quoting, because you can't always assume that your reader remembers every single thing from the text that you're reading. Okay, so you're going to quote, you're going to discuss, analyze, interpret, paraphrase, explain the quote. That's your analysis, and then make sure you have a concluding sentence. So at a minimum, you will have 6 sentences, because your analysis part should probably be at least 2 sentences. So your paragraphs, a minimum of 6 sentences. Okay. Length, there's not a required length. So other than what I just said, you're going to have a paragraph. Too short, probably not enough analysis. Too long, maybe too many ideas. However, I'm not going to go through it, but if you do look at the example close reading paragraph, I mean, you'll see it's not a short paragraph. It's kind of a little bit longer. So I start here, maybe halfway down, and then come back. I go to into the first quarter of the second page. So it probably takes up almost 3/4 of a page when you don't count the question in the MLA formatting. Okay, so anyway, back to the details for this week. So you're going to have your formal response, and then you're going to have your discussion board, which is the same exact thing that I wanted you to do last week. Every time you have your discussion board, which is 9 of them, it's just an informal ask your questions. Make sure you're asking 3 questions about 3 different readings, and answer one of your questions and answer one of your classmates' questions, okay? I'm going to, this week, I'm going to spend time going through your discussion board responses. I'm going to make a cumulative video for everybody, just kind of talking about really great questions, like why the questions were good, really great responses, why the responses were good. I'm just kind of highlighting some other things that I'm seeing going on that I want to say good stuff about. So I'm going to try to make sure I can include everybody. But I mean, you know, who knows? Haven't read it yet. Okay. I think that covers everything. I'm sorry this video is long again. I promise I'll try to work on that. Okay. Have a happy Memorial Day. If you're watching this video on Monday, if you have been in the military, thank you. If you don't like people saying thank you, I'm sorry. I think that's everything. All right, y'all. Email me if you need me.